I once rented a room in a small house in Hartford, Connecticut. This house was actually quite nice, with hardwood floors and a stove that heated the entire house during winter. You walked up some flat, circular stone steps to access the front door, and the landlady had a pretty garden out front. The back of the house was a bit of a mess, and she had, as I soon discovered, a hoarding disorder. Although I could see her home was cluttered, I simply needed a place to stay. One entire room was blocked off because she had so much stuff in it. Still, the room I was renting was charming and the bed was comfortable. I shared it with her one child, who was still in school. The bathroom was large enough to share and there was a washer and dryer and Wi-Fi. Another person briefly rented the room downstairs before she bounced and checked out. I started having odd experiences in this house. It had an aura of stress to it. For instance, one night, I was alone in the house, as the landlady had gone to spend the weekend with her fiancé. It was cold enough that she put wood chips in the stove before leaving. I enjoyed watching the flickering in the darkness. The living room took on a calmer feeling, like the fire inside the stove began to stir. All of a sudden, I had the awful feeling that someone was standing next to me. Spooked, I went upstairs into my room and shut the door. The next weird experience came when I was doing laundry in her messy basement. By this time, I was growing tired of the incredible mess. She kept the living room tidy, but that was about it. I wandered around the dark room as the washer spun, then stopped in a kind of odd horror. Someone had sprayed painted the words "fuck" in blood on the back of the steps. Entirely chilled, I found my Bible and prayed over the words. I wondered if Satanists had lived in the house or witches at one point. I started to feel like I was living in the presence of evil. The room I was staying in grew colder, night after night, literally. I began to feel like I was suffocating and struggled to sleep. One night, I rolled over, sleepy and chilled, and looked at the digital alarm clock. It was around 4:20 a.m. I looked towards the window at the far end of the room, where she kept a round, mirrored coffee table. There was a dark mass there, with no face, just staring at me. I could see curly hair, but no distinct features. It was hovering, almost as if it was lying on its side. I screamed and turned on the light. I asked my landlady the next day if she had heard me screaming, but she denied it. I knew she had once been married to a man who evidently had abused her. When I spoke to her boyfriend, I decided to take a risk. I inquired about my landlady's husband, who was now deceased. Her fiancé told me that the neighbors had described him as evil. I hesitated when I asked if he had curly hair. He replied in the affirmative. I am convinced that I saw some sort of imprint of this person, manifested at a spiritual sensitivity, which I have possessed for most of my life. Later on, I saw a photo of this husband and the landlady's child. He indeed had dark, curly hair.
This actually happened this year in January. We went this New Year to my grandparents' house to see some relatives and to visit them because we are barely able to normally. They live in a small village with around 300 or so people. Most of them are around my grandparents' age or maybe even older. Besides a very old playground, there is a small shrine circle 1 kilometer away from the village. To reach it, we always have to walk through a forest. I know it sounds kind of like a cliche, but it's quite dark in there, even when it's still the daytime. We arrived around 4 p.m., so it was already quite late and we still had to wait for most of our relatives to arrive. My brother, let's call him Ryan for now, suggested that we should visit the shrine with the children that are already here, so they don't have to get too bored, because honestly, there wasn't really anything going on and there's nothing to do in my grandparents' house. We asked around if anyone wants to come with us, and in the end, we had about 6 people in our room. Ryan, my girlfriend, and I were the oldest, so we kept an eye on the children who were walking with us. Ryan walked a bit behind the group and my girlfriend and I were walking ahead. The reason why Ryan walks behind us is that in the area there are a lot of stray dogs and he wanted to make sure that the kids were safe because of the oldest one was our 10-year-old sister and she was only 4'4". If a stray dog came and approached them, they wouldn't be able to defend themselves and we would probably be a little too far away. So to prevent any incidents, we walked like this. When we arrived at the shrine, we prayed and then sat down on a few stones near the shrine, talking to each other while the kids played a few rounds of tag. Around the shrine area was a high wire fence so the visitors weren't bothered by animals or the other earlier mentioned stray dogs. So we let them run around and do their game and have fun. The only way to enter this area were the steps, so we didn't worry too much. We probably spent nearly an hour there before we decided to return home because it was already getting quite dark and we didn't want to wander in the forest at night. When we called the children back to us, one of our cousins asked if they could take Bada with them. We were a bit confused, until Ryan said that she probably met an imaginary friend or something like that. Honestly, it was a bit creepy, but my girlfriend quickly said that we could visit Bada tomorrow, and we really need to leave now because it's getting late. They were okay with this and so we left. This time, I was the one walking behind the group. After we walked for a while, the cousin from earlier pointed into the woods and said, "Bada." We turned our head in the direction, not seeing anything. Ryan told us to stop walking and to be silent for a moment. Later, he told us that he wanted to hear if there was any kind of growling. Of course, we heard nothing. My girlfriend used her cell phone to light up the area a bit. She didn't have a flashlight on her phone, so she just turned on the brightness. Honestly, I was kind of glad that her phone didn't have a flashlight. After a few moments, we decided to continue walking, but my girlfriend still used her cell phone to light up the area. Suddenly she jumped up a bit even though it looked like she was pulling her shoulders back. We asked if there was something wrong. She whispered, "Left side." We still didn't know what she meant, but frozen, we saw the 2 glowing points in the distance. We first thought that this might just be some metal reflecting from the light. But then, the points partly disappeared and reappeared, so it had to be something moving. I really felt the urge to cry and scream. Normally I'm not creeped out easily, but this was even too much for my brother, and he was in the military. It was definitely too large for a dog or a raccoon. When we heard that leaves were rustling like someone was walking through the bush in our direction, all of us agreed that we should pick up the kids and get the heck out of there. We were running while my brother and I were carrying our cousins and my little sister were holding hands with my girlfriend. When we finally reached our grandparents' house, which was directly beside this forest, my sister and our male cousin were crying. Of course, the adults were asking us what happened. We told them what happened and they kind of believed us and told us we shouldn't go there tomorrow. This maybe could have been a creep or some kind of weirdo. But to ease our worries a bit, my grandmother said we should place some salt lines in front of the windows and doors. It sounds a bit silly, but we felt safer when she did that. But the worst part is not over yet. Ryan, my girlfriend and I shared a room, but we couldn't sleep at all, so we talked a bit about what happened earlier. After a while, we did become tired and tried to sleep, but soon the peaceful silence would be interrupted by something that sounded like claws walking on wood. You know the sound when your dog walks over a wooden floor? But this was way slower, 1 claw at a time, agonizingly slow. At this point, not one of us was even moving, and we were definitely barely breathing. We hoped that it was just a dog or a fox. When it became silent again, we waited for a few more minutes and then we moved as far as we could away from the window. It took a while, but we finally fell asleep at some point. My father woke us up saying that we shouldn't have gotten so wild. At first, we didn't know what he meant until we realized that we were sleeping cuddled together, covered in several blankets. After this, the next 2 nights nothing happened, but we didn't visit the shrine while we were there for the rest of our trip. When we drove home, we asked our father if he believed us that there was something out there, and he said he did. Of course, our mother, who is a rational person, told him to shut up because he had started something to scare my sister. I still believe that whatever was there didn't have friendly intentions.
This happened back when I was 12 or 13 years old. Now, a little backstory here. My dad and I volunteered at a bird banding station. If you don't know what bird banding is, it is where researchers put small metal bands on the legs of birds and then release them to track their migration patterns. We set out mist nets in the woods to catch the birds. We used nets instead of traditional traps so we wouldn't harm the birds. So anyway, the guy who owned the bird banding station and the entire property, let's call him R, would let me wander the woods while he was collecting birds out of the nets. R's property was massive, with woods, countryside, marshland, and you name it, all out here on the edge of a small town. Now back to the story. It was a cool summer morning. I was wandering in my usual part of the forest. It wasn't long before I noticed that it was unusually silent, which was odd. I usually hear at least one thrush or blue jay, but there was nothing. All of a sudden in the distance, I hear what sounds like a distressed baby deer or cat. Being the curious animal lover I was, I followed the noise. However, as I got closer to the sound, it seemed to grow a lot farther away. It wasn't long before I came to the edge of our property. The wailing sounded like it was coming from nearby 1 minute, and then sounding very far away the next. Despite being confused and a little creeped out, I for some reason still followed it. However, a few minutes later, I came across a small deer blind. I looked inside to see if anyone was messing with me, but there was nobody there. When I got a better look at the blind, I noticed something a bit off. There were massive slashes on the sides. They looked as if a person had slashed them with a knife, or an animal's claw marks. But there were no bears in this part of Michigan. Odd. So being a curious 13-year-old, I continued on my way to finding this distressed animal. I was walking along the edge of R's woods, trying not to go too far. I'm starting to get frustrated. Where the heck was this scream coming from? So being the naive little girl I was, I mimicked the noise that I was hearing to try to find my way back to the animal, to see if it would show itself. Not a minute passes by and I hear a noise that I will never forget. It sounded like a dog's growl, mixed with a buck's grunt. No deer sounded like this though. Something in my brain told me to get the heck out of there, and I did, leaping over twigs and branches until I'm in R's front yard. As I'm making my way towards his house, I hear the same sound, growling, coming from the woods, about 10 meters behind me at the very least. So instead, I run towards the research sack. Since R wasn't at the house and the doors would most likely be locked, I knew that no one would believe me. So I just said that a deer growled at me. However, I've heard deer grunts and snorts all my life, and they do not even compare to the animal that I heard. It didn't sound like a coyote or a dog either. Although, I never saw the thing. I believe that it was trying to get me off the property to do who knows what. I'm guessing that it might have been a Wendigo, since they can mimic noises of other animals and even voices. I also live near the Great Lakes, a hot spot for Wendigo sightings, maybe even a skinwalker, but they tend to be more in the western states. So, whenever you're in the woods and something doesn't seem right, don't just brush it off. When I was 13, maybe 14, my best friend and I used to steal metal dust caps off cars and put them on our BMXs. We always thought it looked cool. We were young and dumb. Anyway, one night we were bored and decided to go looking around some estates for some dust caps. We eventually settled on a target about 15 minutes from where I lived. The place was small, but it was also almost completely surrounded by woods. We rummaged through the place, but we only make it out with one dust cap. I'm getting ready to take the dust cap off when I notice a man walking by. Crap, he's seen us, I think to myself. After a few seconds of nothing happening, my friend decided we should wait for the man to go back inside, and we wait by some bushes by the little pathway facing the woods. As we were chilling, trying to act normal, I heard the sound of branches breaking. I looked up and saw a man's face, staring at us from behind a large tree, at the front of the woods next to the path, about 10 meters away from us. I ran as fast as I could, on instinct, not saying anything to my friend, as I just assumed he'd seen him as well. Anyway, I ran nearly all the way home before noticing my mate wasn't with me. I then loitered around near his house hoping that he would catch up, but he didn't. I began freaking out and trying to decide what I'd do, as I wasn't going to leave him behind. I slowly walked back to where the guy had been seen last, but initially, I didn't dare go any further as I was afraid of what he would do if he saw me again. I eventually decided I'd suck it up and go back to the estate and see if I could find my mate. Keep in mind we didn't have cell phones back then. I couldn't find him, and the more I searched, the more I was thinking, I'm going to get into so much trouble for this. I'm going to have to go to his house and tell his dad. This was the last-ditch plan, obviously, as he had been in deep crap before if he found out we were at night doing this. Thankfully, though, as I headed back, assured of my doom, I saw my mate fast walking. Where have you been? I asked him. Getting these, 2 for you, 2 for me, he said. He had 4 skull-shaped dust caps in his hand. They were super cool. Did you not see that weird guy in the woods? I asked. Yeah, he wanted me to come over to him. I just told him to F off and went back for the dusties. Here I was, crapping myself over some weirdo my mate wasn't even bothered. Anyway, we went home, and all was forgotten until years later when I moved out to my parents' house and into a flat of my own, but in the same estate as my parents. I had bad insomnia at the time, and this was when I was around 20 or so I used to take my dog on long walks when I couldn't sleep. One night, roughly around 3 a.m.-ish, I put my coat on and headed out with my dog. I ended up going on the top of this housing estate. As I was walking around the perimeter of the estate on my right of the woods was on my left, and this dog stopped walking around 20 meters in front of me. I didn't pay much attention of it until I got closer. The hairs were standing up on the back of her neck, and she was baring her teeth at something in the woods. I stopped for a moment and distinctly remembered the smell of someone smoking cigarettes right next to me. It goes without saying I sprinted the hell out of there and never went back again. Sometimes I think of going back there during the day just to walk through the actual woods, but F that. I haven't built up the courage yet. Stay safe, everyone. The world is a very weird place, especially the woods.
This happened to me when I was about 10 years old, and it still haunts me. This was around 1969 or 1970, and pop bottles was how us kids came up with money for candy or whatever. I would search everywhere for them. Construction sites for gold mines. I would regularly search abandoned properties. I was a little braver than my friends, so I would always have a little more money to show for my efforts. There was a large and creepy house, by itself on the outside of our neighborhood in our small little town, that was clearly abandoned. I never went in there. Something about it just felt different and a little scary, even to me. Having nothing to show for my pop bottle search, I decided to quickly check it out. I should have stuck with my instincts, but I ignored them and went in, which was a big mistake. The walls were painted an awful shade of green, even the ceilings, but the chilling thing was the mirrors. There must have been hundreds of them. They were literally everywhere. Many were on the floor broken, and you couldn't even walk through without stepping on pieces of them. They were of all sizes and shapes, hanging on wires or frames, or just stands or shelves, or just laying against the walls. You could see all around you, and every room you went. I never imagined something like this, and it blew my mind. I couldn't process what I was seeing because it horrified me. My heart started pounding and I felt dizzy. It was way too much, and I got out of there, and I didn't think my feet even touched the steps leading the place. I sat by a tree for a long time and got myself together before going home. I was soaking wet from sweating and feeling very sick. I would never know who put those mirrors up or what they were afraid of, but that image has stayed with me my entire life. I even hate the shade of green when I see it. They had a house of mirrors at a fair, and just looking at it made me sick. Even at a department store that has a large display of backed by mirrors, I have to look away. My days of exploring abandoned places have come to an end. You never know what's going to be on inside. It might just give you a phobia you're stuck with for the rest of your life. I'll have to say, this is probably the scariest experience I've ever had, and I'm going to share it with you. It started when I got a babysitting job for my neighbors. I had to go to a meeting. I was about 18 years old when this happened, and it was really easy taking care of the baby. I had a really fun time. This was until the baby started crying. I had a very hard time calming it down. When I did, I started hearing banging on the walls. I opened the door to see what was going on. I found nothing, so I closed the door. I put the baby to sleep and rested on the couch watching some TV. I heard banging coming again from somewhere in the walls. I got annoyed quickly. I opened the door again and walked around the house with a flashlight and a knife. I used a knife just in case, safety precautions. Again, I didn't find anything out there until I heard this loud and horrific screech. I covered my ears and went to the back of the house because that's where the screech was emanating from. I then looked to find this lanky, tall, massive beast with the head of a goat and a human body. It stood on two legs. It looked down at me, screeching yet again. I was shocked and scared. I barely even moved. I then flashed a light into its eyes and stabbed the beast over and over, about 14 times before running away into the nearby forest. I left the knife in its chest as it ran. I then ran back into the house, closed and locked all of the doors. I also closed all the blinds. I ran to the baby's room and made sure the baby was safe. I then stayed in the room with the baby till the parents came back. I couldn't relax at all after that. They paid me $50 and then thanked me. I then walked home traumatized. I had to get rid of my clothes because they were covered in blood, but luckily I was able to cover my shirt with my jacket so the family didn't notice. I only got 2 hours of sleep that night, and I was pretty tired at school in the morning. I even slept in my first period class. I found out that thing was from one of my friends. I still don't really know if it was this thing they call Goat Man, but that's what my friends seem to think it is.
Well, to start this off, I grew up in the 1970s in a small town in North Carolina. Well, it was almost too small to be called a town with only a school and a couple of small shops. I'm guessing you can imagine how boring it would be to be a teenager there, and it would have been so if it wasn't for the woods. The neighborhood that I lived in was backed up to a big forest that spread out for about 3 miles, and it's where I spent most of my teenage years with my 2 best friends, Levi and Connor. They both were in my class at this time. We were all 15. Levi lived across the street. He was smart and kinda quiet, unlike Connor, who lived down at the bad side of the neighborhood. Connor was a troublemaker, always getting sent to the dean's office at least once a week. He was loud, obnoxious, and a natural leader, always finding something for us to do. Be it legal or not, when he was around, we were never bored. It was the beginning of the summer holidays, and Levi had called for me. We went down to get Connor, and he was messing around with his younger brother's scooter in the front yard. We asked him if he wanted to go into the woods, and he said yes. Now, just in case this may be necessary, Connor had almost black shaggy hair, the most beautiful eyes. One was a light blue while the other was a brownish color. He always wore scuffy red Converse shoes and a denim jacket, and of course, I just had the biggest crush on him. While Levi had style brown hair, brown eyes, and freckles and was considerably shorter than me. Then there was myself, a red-headed brown-eyed girl that had quite a lot of people scared of me due to me being hyper. I was always ready to go somewhere or do something, and I was always talking about something. Anyway, we made our way into the woods and started walking into a random direction. We did this for fun, just to see what happens. Usually, we would try to get lost to try to find our way back, which most of the time just led us to being late for dinner and getting sent to our beds early, or worse for worse, getting grounded. But we did it anyway. We were making our way along a deer trail that I didn't think we had ever been on before, when Connor found a pile of crap and of course dipped a stick into it and then tried to chase us with it. Levi and I, of course, freaked out and scattered. Neither of us wants to be smeared with crap. I ran off, and luckily for me, Connor followed Levi instead in the opposite direction. After a while of them not coming back, I began to think they had left me, and I was furious. I was walking down the way I had seen them run, when suddenly something stuck out the bush and grabbed me. I let out a surprised yelp, and Connor shushed me, only for me to shout to him, scaring me. Only when I saw the look on his face, I decided that I shouldn't be talking, and I shut my mouth. Connor whispered to me, "You have got to say this," and began to lead me through the bushes, and further we went. The more and more we went, the more I could smell something disgusting. We came across something green. Levi started staring at the ground with a weird expression on his face. I was about to ask what was wrong, but Connor tugged me past him a few more feet, away to where there was this ditch, and in the ditch I could only describe as something out of a nightmare. It was a body. It was a purple-blue color. It almost looked swollen. The stench was so terrible I had to cover my mouth with my jumper so as not to gag. I backed up to where Levi was. Connor stood looking into the trench for about 5 more seconds before he walked back over to us. "Cool, huh?" he said with a grin. Levi gave him a disgusting look before saying, "No, it ain't cool. We need to go home and call the police." "What? Why?" What do you mean, why? There's a body dumped in the woods, Connor. It's clearly been murdered." "No, man, it's so cool. We cannot get the police. If we do, they're gonna take this away and think we were the killers." "Why would they think it was us?" "Because that's what the police do, man." "Don't be stupid, Connor. You can't stop me." "Fuck's sake, man. If you get the police out here, this will just be on the news, and we'll get questioned by everybody. They'll probably set out a curfew. They'll banish from going into the forest. There'll be police everywhere. And then, you know what? Summer will freaking suck." I had just been quietly watching the argument take place, not really caring about what happened. But that got me, and there was no way in hell I was going to let my summer get ruined. Connor's right. "Oh, what? You're not serious." "Levi, we have the whole summer left to do whatever we want. Do you really want to spend it inside with a curfew?" "Yeah, man, 2 against 1. Come on, you can't do anything stupid." Levi looked crushed. "Fine. but I'm not coming near this again." Connor had let out a whoop of joy. We had made our way home listening to him talk about how cool it would be and how this would be our secret. Well, the secret didn't last very long, as by the end of the week Connor had shown all the rest of our friends, and it was a miracle that nobody did call the police. But I guess that just goes to show how close everybody was. We were like one big family, and almost like all families, we had our secrets. The body remained there for the rest of the summer. I only went up a few more times and I'd gotten less interesting. As each time we went, there were only bones left. Anyway, on the last week of summer vacation, we decided to have a big camp out with all of our friends. There was me, Levi, Connor, Josh, and Wash. He was a loud-mouthed boy with mousy hair and blue eyes. Alice was there as well. She was a quiet girl with straight brown hair. Courtney was there, who I could only describe as the only girl I actually saw as a friend, probably because she was the only one who put thought into things and didn't have a bratty attitude. And then there was Keddy, the kid whose garden we were camping in. He had sandy blonde hair, brown eyes, freckles. His dad owned the biggest garden, so of course we could camp there. And as an added bonus, Kenny's garden backed right up into the woods. And even though we had promised Kenny's mom that we wouldn't go into the woods after dark, we were definitely planning to. But unfortunately, our plans were foiled by a good old Mother Nature, as she decided to make it rain. So all 7 of us piled into this big tent, which belonged to Courtney. We played cards for about 2 hours, making up new games with crazy rules. Joss even suggested that we play strip poker, only to have a shoe chucked at him and to be told that if he carried on acting like a pedo, we would send him home. He quieted down after that, and we carried on playing until Kenny began complaining that we were going to run out of oxygen. This went on for a good 10 minutes before he decided to unzip the tent to stick out his head so he could breathe. "Hey guys, the rain stopped," said Kenny excitedly. "Seriously?" I said. "Yeah, let's go do something." We then all argued for a good 20 minutes about where we were going to go and what we were going to do. And so far, breaking into school and hanging out there was winning until Connor said, "Why don't we go see the body?" That was it. Everyone put on their shoes and coats, and Kenny took down his dollar store flashlight that he had hung from the roof of Courtney's tent, and off we went. Connor and Kenny led the way, but Kenny's flashlight, to be honest, was pretty crap and didn't light anything very well. And I don't believe that we needed it anyway, because even though I hadn't been to the body in weeks, it was burned into my mind how to get there. The whole way there we were talking about what it would look like now, and how creepy this all was, and then the conversation took a turn that it never had before. We began talking about who we thought the body was and why they were dead, and who had murdered them. And this scared me, because it made me see it for what it really was. A dead body of a murdered person hidden by someone in the woods, and we had never reported it. I brought this issue up to Connor, who simply stated, "It's too late now, there's probably only bones left, and even if we did tell the police, we would get in trouble for holding off for so long." To this, I remained silent, and kept walking alongside Courtney and Levi, listening to Josh telling Alice some bullshit story behind us. They soon went silent though, as we came to the ditch. Connor and Kenny stood silently at the edge, shining the flashlight into it, Kenny's mouth agape in horror. I asked what it was, and Connor shushed me and beckoned me and the rest of us over with his finger. As I came up to the edge, what I saw had freaked me out. In that ditch was something piled on top of the original body. It was wrapped in a yellow floral pattern bedsheet, and it was tied with some sort of string at the top to make it not slip off. Everyone stood silent for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was probably only a couple of seconds before Connor pulled his Stanley knife out of his pocket and descended into the ditch. Levi began to protest, but Connor turned and shushed him and whispered to Kenny to shine his light on him, to which Kenny obeyed Connor, then cut some of the string and poured to the seat to reveal the face of a young girl. She stared up at us with a dead glaze over her eyes and a blank expression. I felt like I was going to be sick, and apparently so did Levi, as he began to violently retch, and he turned away. I couldn't turn away no matter how hard I tried. I was mesmerized. Connor suddenly jumped back. With a look of sudden realization and horror across his pale face as he began to scramble up the side of the ditch. Josh helped him up, and a chorus of what happened and what was it began, only to have him frantically shush us. With a shaking voice he said, "It's dry as bone." A feeling of absolute dread settled in my stomach. If you don't get what the big deal was, it had rained only an hour earlier, and everything was wet. Mist's body was dry, which means that it had been put here recently. Everyone was silent. Then there was a noise behind us across the ditch, and my heart was in my throat. As we turned around, and Kenny quickly pointed his flashlight at where the noise was coming from. Then, suddenly from across the ditch came an extremely bright light, illuminating us and making the person holding the light impossible to see. "Run!" yelled Connor, grabbing me by the arm, and everyone sprinted. And whoever it was with the light sprinted to where we were. They were running violently, randomly illuminating trees and brushes that scared the shit out of some deer. And then suddenly, it went off. I felt my heart stop and Connor was muttering, "Shit, shit, shit, where the heck is he?" under his breath as we ran for our lives. I tried listening to hear if a guy was still coming after us, but everything was so blurry I just couldn't keep track of who was doing what and where the noises were. Levi stumbled, and a couple of seconds later, face streaked with tears of fear, followed by Josh. We huddled together, and everyone began blabbering out what the heck was going on, and who was that, and what do we do if he finds us. But then Courtney spoke up. "Where's Alice?" Everyone went silent and looked towards the woods in fear until Levi spoke up. "Can I go get your dad?" Connor looked over to glare at Levi before turning to Kenny and barking, "No, Kenny no gets your dad. Let's think about this, okay?" What do you mean, let's think about this? He will call the police, and don't you think the police are gonna believe us? I don't think so. This arguing went on for probably 5 more minutes, until eventually, everybody shushed up. Kenny begins pounding on his back door, and this goes on for about 5 minutes before Mr. Stokes opens the new door with a red face. "What are you guys doing? What are you playing, boys? 2 in the goddamn morning," he hollered. "Dad, Alice is in the woods." "What? She ran in when we were playing tag and she hasn't come back out. We think she got lost." Mr. Stokes stared off into the woods for a bit, squinting, trying to see beyond the tree line before muttering an "okay" and repeating into the house. To only 5 minutes return with a big flashlight. He stomped off into the woods, and we all waited for about 20 minutes before he returned and said, "Fun's home, kids. Go home, get your fathers, and tell them to bring flashlights." And that was it. We all went home, told our parents what was going on, and the men went out into the woods to look for Alice. While the woman stood around in Kenny's backyard, we were all told to stay at home, to which I didn't. I crossed the street and knocked on Levi's door. He answered it, and I stepped inside, and apparently Connor had the same idea, as he was sitting on the sofa in Levi's room, eating some chips. "Do you think they'll find her?" I asked quietly. "Yeah, she's probably just panicked and got herself lost," said Connor. "And what if he got her? What if she's dead? What are we gonna do then?" said Levi, as he stood by the window looking into the dark street. Suddenly, the sound of police sirens cut through the air. "Oh no," mumbled Levi as the police cars drove down the road to Kenny's house. We watched as 2 police cars pulled up and the men came out carrying big flashlights. They walked around the back into the woods. After that, I and Kenny went home. I watched out my window as suddenly 5 more police cars appeared at my parents' house. It was around 6 in the morning at this point. I asked my mother what had happened, and she told me that they found a body in the woods, and that it wasn't looking good. The next day, the police interviewed all of us. We all stuck to Connor's story. They didn't find Alice, and just like he said, it would be there as news coverage. A ban on us was going into the woods, and there was a curfew for 9 p.m. And when we went back to school, there was an assembly of safety for strangers. They found Alice in the end, 12 days later, chopped up into little pieces and crammed into a garbage can on the side of the road about 10 miles from her house. I have my own kids now, and since I've lost contact with all my childhood friends apart from Levi, who I now have a child to, and he recently told me that Kenny had been killed due to an overdose, we were invited to a funeral along with the rest of the kids I grew up with. I will not be attending that funeral.
This happened on November 2nd of this year, 2018. I was just getting out of work, and I decided to see if any of my friends wanted to hang out and probably spark up. My hours were shortened thanks to winter scheduling, so I got out at 9 instead of 10. The moment I got out, I called my friend Bobby to see if he wanted to drive around with me and go smoking at this hiking trail in my town, since it just got a new parking area recently. I picked him up and we smoked on our way to the trail. My town is small, and it only took 5 minutes to get there. The trail we were on is out of the way, so there isn't much light or housing in the area. We pulled up in front of the trail, and I stopped in the middle of the road. It's typically dark by 9 during the winter, but this darkness was a thick black tarp enveloping the parking area, so we decided screw that, and we left. My pride being wounded for driving away like that, I told him to hit up my cousin Mike. Me and my cousin had a falling out in high school, but I thought it was about time that we buried the hatchet. We picked Mike up and started telling him about the trail, and he agreed he thought it'd be a fun idea if we went. Feeling safer with another person tagging along, we came up the dark wooded road and pulled into the parking area. We got out and started walking towards the trail. Some info about the trail is it splits into 2 parts, so you can go from one end all the way around, or you can go up the hill and go all the way around. We had our flashlights on our phones on, and we decided to go all the way around. As we walked through the wet leaves and over roots, we came to an object in the path. "That looks like a cross, my guy," I said. Mike and I stopped in our tracks, as we'd seen enough horror films to know it's the ones that get curious and investigate who wind up dead. Bobby, on the other hand, seems to have had balls of steel, or a death wish, because he just kept walking towards it. "It's just a trail sign," he called out. We started walking after him when I got a very weird feeling. It felt like the butterflies you get when you're nervous about something, but it was deeper than that, and it made me feel very uneasy. I let Mike know something felt quite off. "Yeah, I don't like being out here either, to be honest," Mike said. Soon after saying this, he stopped and let me know he heard something. I laughed, swearing I wasn't going to fall for that childish prank. Unfortunately, when we were almost to Bobby, I heard a rustle in the woods. I stopped in my tracks and pointed into the distance. Initially, there was nothing, so I thought we imagined it, but as Bobby started walking back towards us, the sound of leaves crunching in the woods followed. It was a lot like something trying to quietly stalk in a forest. They have to walk slowly or perfectly in time with you, but there's still the crunching sound of leaves. "We should probably leave," Mike said. Agreeing with Mike, we quickened our pace back down the trail. The slow crunch of leaves turned into a heavy stepping. As we ran, we could hear something alongside us, stalking us through the woods. The noises of something out there made us too paranoid, and we started sprinting at this point. I'm a heavier guy, but I outran both Mike and Bobby. I turned to look into the woods, and I saw the black outline of what looked like a person behind a tree, just staring at me. I saw this for a few seconds before sprinting again. The figure must have been at least 7 feet tall. When we made it out of the woods, we could still hear the thing not far behind us. I fumbled for my keys, struggling to get them in the lock, but as I did, I noticed that whatever was stalking us in the woods seemed to be walking back and forth along the edge of the woods. I decided not to question it and got in the car with Mike and Bobby and slammed the gas to get us out of there. When we finally made it home, there were no more issues. We were never stalked outside of those woods, and nothing seemed to follow us home. One of my biggest questions from the entire experience is what would have happened to us if we decided to go up the hill from the beginning. Would the thing stalking us have come up from behind us? I shudder to think what would have happened then. We hope to go back someday, but for now, we're just thankful to be alive.